Good evening. And welcome to another calm and peaceful journey into the softer corners of American history. Tonight, we'll drift gently into the world of American tall tales. Stories whispered around campfires, passed from one generation to the next, shaped by the wide forests and endless skies of a growing nation. As you settle in and let your body relax, allow your eyes to close softly. Let the slow rhythm of this bedtime story ease your thoughts, quiet your breath, and guide you toward rest. In this soothing tale, we'll explore the legendary figure of Paul Bunyan, the giant lumberjack whose footsteps were said to shape rivers, lakes, and valleys. His story is filled with gentle wonder, cozy exaggerations, and the quiet magic of old American folklore. So take a deep, unhurried breath, and let's begin our journey into the calm, towering myths of the past. The story begins in the far northern wilderness of early America, a place where the forest stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and the air carried the crisp scent of pine and cool morning mist. Lumber camps were scattered through the woods, small clusters of cabins where hard-working men lived quietly, rising with the sun and resting beside warm campfires at night. Life in these camps moved at a slow, steady pace. Men chopped timber, hauled logs, and shared simple meals cooked over open flames. In the evenings, when the day's labor was finally done, they gathered in the soft glow of lantern light, speaking in low, unhurried voices. It was in this world of long winters, tall trees, and quiet companionship that the earliest whispers began. Whispers of a giant lumberjack named Paul Bunyan, whose footsteps, some said, could shake the snow from the treetops. In the quiet stillness of early America's northern frontier, long before the cities rose and the roads stretched neatly across the land, there were deep forests that seemed to go on without end. They were places of drifting mist and towering pines, where the wind carried the scent of sap and cold soil, and where the nights were so soft and undisturbed that a person could hear their own heartbeat if they sat beside a fire long enough. This is where the earliest whispers of the giant lumberjack, Paul Bunyan, first began. And tonight, as you settle in and allow your thoughts to slow, I'd like to take you there, gently, one slow breath at a time. Imagine the faint glow of a campfire deep within those woods. The flicker of orange light pools around a small group of lumbermen wrapped in thick coats, their faces warm from the heat while the air behind them stays cold and blue. They speak in low voices, not hurried, not urgent, but in that easy lingering rhythm that people use when the workday is done. You can almost hear the soft crackle of the logs dropping into embers, and the distant creak of the trees swaying overhead. In this calm setting, stories grew the way moss clings to the base of old trees, slowly, quietly, almost without being noticed at first. The men who worked in these forests were far away from their homes, sometimes for months at a time, and the nights could feel long and empty. To pass the time, they shared tales about the world they knew, stretching the truth just enough to turn ordinary moments into gentle wonders. It was in this atmosphere that Paul Bunyan first appeared, not suddenly, but as a soft echo across camps. One lumberman would mention hearing about a man so tall he needed a wagon just to carry his boots. Another would add that this same fellow could chop down whole groves of trees in a single day. At first, they were just small stories, carried lightly from voice to voice. But like the sparks that drift upward from a fire, they rose higher with every retelling. Still, there is something a little mysterious about how these stories began. No one kept written records of the first versions. And no one can say with certainty who invented the name or the details. It's as if Paul Bunyan stepped out of the mist of the northern woods, formed from the imaginations of people who spent long hours with nothing but the rhythm of axes and the murmur of wind to accompany them. These early tales feel rooted in real life, yet touched by something slightly unreal, as though the forest itself had decided to create a companion for the workers who shaped it. The men described Paul as impossibly large, so tall that a man could walk between his legs without brushing his hat. His footsteps were said to shake snow from the branches, and his voice, deep and warm, could be heard rolling across frozen lakes. But the tone of the stories was never frightening. Instead, Paul was remembered as a gentle giant, a friendly presence whose size, though incredible, felt comforting rather than overwhelming. In the solitude of the frontier, imagining a giant companion may have made the world feel a little less empty, and as the years passed, the stories began to drift southward with the workers. Every lumber camp had its own version of Paul. Some said he carved rivers with a drag of his heel. Others said he shaped mountains by accident, simply dropping his dinner plates on the ground. A few swore they had heard his laughter echoing at dawn, long before anyone else had woken. These details changed from place to place. But the spirit of the tale remained the same, quiet, humorous, and rooted in camaraderie. In the evenings, when the work was done, a man would lean back on a log, fold his hands across his chest, and begin with something as simple as, "Did you ever hear about Paul Bunyan?" And those nearby would smile, knowing they were in for another drifting, peaceful story. Sometimes the teller would lower his voice, making the tale feel as though it belonged to the listener alone. Other times, he would let the fire's crackle fill the spaces between sentences, stretching the story into the long northern night. Even then, listeners felt the gentle mystery surrounding this giant. Was Paul a real person once? Changed by years of exaggeration? Was he created from the needs of hard-working men craving humor and warmth? Or was he simply a reflection of the forests themselves, vast, strong, endlessly patient? No one could say for certain, and perhaps that uncertainty made the stories even more soothing. They were not facts to be checked or doubts to be answered, but simple, comforting tales meant to ease weary minds. As we move deeper into Paul Bunyan's world, imagine how these lumber camps looked in the early winter mornings. A pale silver light settling over the snow. The smell of pine needles crushed under heavy boots. The soft thud of axes striking wood, echoing through the frozen air. Life was hard, but it had its quiet rhythms and familiar comforts. And Paul, though larger than life, seemed to fit naturally into this world, an oversized guardian watching over the men as they worked. These early stories reveal something gentle about the people who told them. In the long hours away from home, surrounded by cold wilderness, they created a figure who was strong enough to handle any hardship, yet kind enough to share a laugh at the end of the day. Paul Bunyan was not a hero of battles or conflict. He was a companion in work and weather, someone who brought a sense of wonder to everyday life. And so, as this first part of the story settles into its ending, allow your thoughts to drift with the slow rhythm of those early campfire nights. Think of the quiet glow, the low voices, the easy laughter, and the soft mystery of a tale that grew without a single author. It was shaped by many hands and many hearts, carried from forest to forest until it became part of the country's folklore. As the fire crackles low and the night deepens over the tall pines, the story of Paul Bunyan is only beginning. Somewhere in the distance, just past the edge of your imagination, a giant figure takes shape, gentle, steady, and waiting to be known. In those early days of the northern frontier, when stories drifted as gently as morning fog between the trees, there was one tale that always made listeners lean in just a little closer. It was the question of how someone as impossibly large as Paul Bunyan could have come into the world. Around the fireside, the lumberman would smile before telling it, because even though the details changed from camp to camp, the heart of the story always stayed the same. As you settle in and let your thoughts soften, I'd like to share this chapter of his life with you, slowly, quietly, the way those early storytellers might have done. They would begin by describing a winter so cold it seemed to settle deep into the bones of the earth. Snow lay across the land in thick blankets, sparkling like ground-up crystal beneath pale morning light. This was the season the giant baby was said to have arrived, wrapped not in cloth, but in warm flannel sheets stitched together from whatever the family could find. Even as an infant, Paul was larger than any child the town had ever seen. When he yawned, the windows were said to rattle softly, and when he stretched, floorboards gave a gentle groan beneath him, as though the house itself were shifting to make room. But the tone of this story was never alarming or exaggerated for shock. Instead, the men told it with a sense of wonder, as though remembering a time when the world felt wide enough to allow such possibilities. They spoke of Paul's mother, gentle and calm, who moved through her home with unhurried patience. She never seemed surprised that her son was different. She would hum to him in a soft voice, brushing a hand across his hair the way any mother might, accepting each new sign of his unusual size with quiet grace. People in the town would gather to see him, not out of fear, but out of curiosity. They were living in an age of big landscapes and big dreams, where the unknown was still just beyond the horizon. So, when a child appeared who seemed shaped by the same vastness that defined the northern woods, they welcomed the idea more easily than one might expect. They would smile, share stories, and marvel at how Paul could lift a grown man's hat with one finger, or how he would clap his hands with such enthusiasm that dust drifted down from the rafters. Still, there was always a gentle sense of mystery woven into the story of his childhood. Some said they heard strange sounds the night he was born, like the low rumble of distant thunder, even though the sky was perfectly clear. Others mentioned noticing animal tracks circling the home in the days before, as though the forest itself had been waiting for something. A few men claimed that the northern lights glowed brighter that night, shimmering in colors they had never seen before. These details were never told with certainty, only as soft possibilities that made listeners wonder if Paul's arrival was connected to something larger than anyone understood. One of the lumberman's favorite memories to share was the moment Paul took his first steps outside. The snow was deep that winter, so deep it reached the hips of most grown men. But when baby Paul toddled out the door, the snow only rose to his ankles. He walked with a wobbling, cheerful determination, leaving footprints so wide and round that people could stand inside them with room to spare. The family dog, a patient old hound, trotted behind him, occasionally climbing into the tracks to rest when its paws grew cold. As Paul grew, so did the stories. The cabin that had once felt spacious began to seem smaller and smaller. When Paul sat near the table, his knees bumped gently against the wood. When he lay down to sleep, he needed more than one bed pushed together to stretch out comfortably. Yet his family never complained. They simply adjusted, living with the quiet acceptance of people who understood that some things are meant to be appreciated rather than questioned. Paul himself was gentle, even as a child. He had a warm laugh that rolled like soft thunder across the yard, and he loved helping his parents with chores. If they needed firewood, he would carry entire logs under his arms, not knowing that other families chopped them first. If the animals needed tending, he would crouch down to pet them, his large hands moving with delicate care. Even when he played, he did so with an easy calm, as though aware that the world around him was smaller and needed to be treated gently. But there were moments when the people in town sensed that Paul was meant for something beyond their simple boundaries. When he looked toward the forest, his eyes seemed to follow paths that only he could see. Sometimes, late in the evening, he would wander to the edge of the trees and stand there quietly, listening. His parents would watch from the porch, unsure of what drew him to that place, but trusting in the peacefulness that always surrounded him. And there was something else, something subtle. Animals seemed unusually comfortable around him. Birds would land near his feet. Deer would walk closer than usual, pausing with their ears tilted forward as though curious. Even the wind seemed to shift its direction when he stepped outside, brushing past him with a soft rustle that no one could fully explain. These details were never emphasized dramatically, only mentioned in passing, like small pieces of a larger puzzle that no one had fully put together. As Paul reached the age of early boyhood, the town found itself quietly proud of him. He represented something hopeful, something larger, literally and figuratively, than their everyday lives. When travelers passed through, townspeople spoke of Paul the way someone might speak of a beautiful sunset or an unusually good harvest. They didn't boast. They didn't embellish. They simply shared the story with a warm, steady fondness, yet all the while, there lingered a soft question that no one spoke aloud: how large would he become? And perhaps more importantly, where would a child like Paul find his place in a world that had never known anyone like him? These questions drifted through the minds of those who knew him, carried like thin threads of curiosity woven into the fabric of daily life. But the stories never lingered too long on uncertainty. They always came back to the simple, grounding moments: the sound of Paul's gentle laughter, the quiet thud of his footsteps across the yard, the easy way he held his parents' hands with care. As the lumbermen shared these memories, the firelight would reflect in their eyes. The listeners, wrapped in blankets and leaning back against their packs, would feel themselves drifting into the rhythm of the story. There was something comforting in hearing about a childhood shaped by both wonder and simplicity. Something calming in the idea of a boy growing steadily, quietly, guided by kindness and curiosity. And as Paul grew, so too did the sense that he was being slowly pulled toward the wider world. The forest seemed to call to him in soft whispers. The long horizon seemed to hold a promise that only he could understand. The town, though fond of him, could not contain the life he was meant to live. When Paul finally reached the size of a young giant, the lumberman would say, it became clear that he would someday step beyond the boundaries of his childhood home. He was not leaving out of restlessness or loneliness, but because the world itself seemed to be waiting for him, inviting him to explore its vast spaces and shape its story. And so this part of Paul's tale ends with a gentle sense of transition. A feeling that something new is approaching, carried on a slow breeze from the northern pines. The firelight fades, the night deepens. And Paul, now too large for the life he once knew, stands quietly at the edge of the woods, looking toward the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. The story of how Paul Bunyan first met Babe the blue ox was one the old lumberman always saved for a quiet moment in the night, when the fire had burned down low and the forest around them had softened into a gentle hush. They told it slowly, almost tenderly, because this chapter marked the beginning of a friendship that shaped the legend in ways no one could have expected. And as we move into this part of the tale, let your thoughts settle comfortably, as though you, too, were sitting near that fire, listening with calm curiosity. The winter Paul wandered into was unlike any he had known before. By this time he was fully grown, at least, as grown as a man of his kind could be, and he had begun exploring the deeper parts of the northern wilderness. There were days when he walked through forests so thick with snow-laden branches that the world felt muffled, wrapped in a blanket of white silence. His breath drifted out in gentle clouds, and each step sent a soft, airy crunch through the stillness. The scent of pine hung in the cold air, fresh and crisp, like nature breathing slowly beside him. That season brought storms heavier than usual. Snow piled high along ridges and hollows, smoothing out the land until the hills looked like slow-moving waves frozen in place. Many said it was the coldest winter the region had seen in decades. The kind of winter that made even the toughest lumberman pause before stepping outside at dawn. Yet for Paul, the cold felt more invigorating than troubling. He moved through the drifts with a steady ease, brushing away the frost that clung to his beard, listening to the faint groan of trees weighed down by ice. It was during one of these long walks that he noticed something unusual. A faint sound, so faint most people might have overlooked it entirely. It was almost like a distant cry, thin and shaky, carried on the wind between the pines. Paul stopped, his breath stilling as he listened. The wind shifted, and the sound came again, slightly clearer this time. It was not the call of any animal he recognized. There was a small tremble in it, a kind of pleading softness that stirred something in him. He turned toward the sound and began walking, pushing through deeper snow as he followed the faint, wavering cry. The world around him felt oddly still, as though holding its breath. Even the usual rustle of winter birds seemed muted. With each step, the sound grew a little stronger, guiding him over a rise in the land and into a narrow valley he had never explored before. The valley was quiet, tucked between tall trees whose branches drooped under the weight of fresh snow. The ground glowed faintly in the filtered light, untouched and smooth except for one curious detail, an indentation in the snow, large enough to catch his eye. As he stepped closer, he realized it was a footprint. But not a human one. And not quite like the tracks of any creature he knew. It was round, deep, and wider than a wagon wheel. Paul studied it for a moment, wondering what kind of animal could have made such a mark. There was a sense of mystery in the air, the kind that sends a soft ripple through the imagination. Nothing about the track felt threatening, but it certainly felt unusual. He found another print nearby, then another, leading toward a cluster of bent trees at the far end of the valley. The cry came again, quiet, trembling. When Paul pushed past the low branches and stepped into the clearing beyond, he saw it, a calf, lying on its side in the snow. But not just any calf. Its fur shimmered with a soft bluish tint, as though touched by moonlight even in the dim glow of the day. Its body was nearly the size of a full-grown ox, yet its movements were uncertain and weak, like those of a young creature battling the cold. The calf lifted its head slightly, its eyes a deep, gentle shade of blue that reflected the sky above. Snowflakes clung to its coat, and steam curled from its breath. Paul felt a quiet tug inside him, a mixture of wonder and concern. He moved gently toward the calf, careful not to startle it. Even for a man of his size, he knew how to soften his steps, how to approach with calm intention. As he drew closer, the blue calf watched him with a tired curiosity. It did not attempt to flee or frighten. Instead, it blinked slowly, as though sensing something reassuring in Paul's presence. He knelt beside it, brushing away the snow with the back of his hand. The calf's fur was cold, trembling lightly from the winter chill. Paul spoke softly, his voice low and steady. He didn't know if the animal could understand him, but the tone carried warmth, and that seemed to matter. The calf gave a small, weak grunt, almost as if responding. Paul looked around, searching the valley for any sign of other animals, perhaps a herd or a mother who might have become separated. But the valley was empty. Silent. The storm had likely swept through quickly, leaving the calf stranded and alone. He wondered how such a rare creature had ended up here. And why its fur glowed that soft shade of blue. There had always been stories of unusual animals in the northern woods, creatures glimpsed only once, never confirmed, but passed down in quiet whispers late at night. Some said they were remnants of an older world, from a time when nature shaped itself in strange, unexpected ways. Others believed they appeared only when certain people or certain moments called them forth. The lumbermen never agreed on the details, but they shared a belief that the forest held its own mysteries, patient and watchful. Whatever the origin of the blue calf, Paul knew one thing with certainty: it needed warmth. He gathered the creature gently into his arms, lifting it as though it weighed little more than a bundle of firewood. The calf sighed, leaning into him with surprising trust. Paul carried it across the valley and into the shelter of the trees, where the wind softened and the air felt a touch warmer. He cleared a space beneath a thick spruce, breaking branches to create a barrier from the cold ground. Then he set the calf down and sat beside it, offering his body heat like a shield against the biting air. The night in the small port town had grown deeper, though not darker. A faint silver glow lingered across the rooftops and the narrow stone paths, as if the moon itself wished to keep watch over the quiet world below. And in that soft, pale light, the harbor seemed almost suspended in time, boats resting silently at anchor, their ropes swaying in the mild breeze, and the scent of cool salt water drifting gently across the sleeping town. Tonight, our story moves slowly toward the heart of the early voyage. Toward the moment when plans turned into motion, and quiet thoughts became steady footsteps on a wooden deck. This chapter's focus revolves around preparation, how people soften their fears through routine, and how even the smallest details can bring comfort before a long journey. Yet, behind these calm preparations, there remains a trace of something unknown. A gentle mystery waiting just beyond the edge of the horizon. The story continues where we left it, in the stillness before dawn. The harbor was almost empty at this hour, save for the faint silhouettes of a few early risers moving with lanterns in hand. Their light glimmered through the gray air like tiny floating stars, each step echoing softly against the planks beneath them. The ship that would carry our main characters, the sturdy, weathered vessel with its tall masts and calm presence, rested quietly in the water, the faint creak of its timbers sounding like a slow, patient breath. Nearby, the crew was gathering. Not hastily, not with noise or urgency, but with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that the calmest beginnings often shape the longest journeys. They spoke in low voices, barely above a whisper, as if careful not to disturb the peace around them. Crates were lifted gently instead of dropped. Coils of rope were laid out with careful hands. A barrel rolled across the dock with a soft, rhythmic thud. And all the while, the cool morning air wrapped itself around them, refreshing, steady, and strangely reassuring. Amid this calm activity, our travelers arrived. Their footsteps were soft, but their presence held a certain weight, an awareness that the next time they set foot on land, life might look different. Some carried small bundles of personal belongings, tied neatly with cloth or tucked carefully under their arms. Others carried nothing more than a simple satchel and a quiet determination. What mattered most was not what they held, but what they felt. One of them paused as they approached the ship, their eyes wandering over the faint shimmer of the water. They let their hand rest on the wooden railing near the gangplank, feeling the slight texture of salt and thyme beneath their fingertips. It seemed like such a simple thing, touching the side of the ship, but in that moment, it was a way of accepting the unknown ahead. Another traveler, older and slower in their movements, looked back at the town. The rooftops, the dim lanterns, the familiar shape of a market building in the distance. Perhaps they were silently saying a farewell. Or perhaps they were simply taking in every detail to remember later, on nights when the sea stretched endlessly around them. The gentle mystery of the journey lingered there, quiet, unspoken, almost invisible, but present enough to stir the imagination. The ship's captain stood near the end of the gangplank, greeting each traveler with a nod that was both formal and kind. He spoke very little, but his eyes were steady, as if assuring each person that they were in capable hands. The way he carried himself, straight-backed, calm, with a softened seriousness, seemed to bring a sense of peace to those stepping aboard. Above them, the sky was beginning to shift. The deep blue of night slowly receded, inviting the earliest hints of dawn to stretch across the horizon. Soft gradients of lavender and pale gold brushed lightly against the clouds. The transition was almost imperceptible, like a watercolor spreading gently across a blank page. The travelers began settling into the ship. Not rushing, but exploring their small spaces, adjusting their belongings, and taking in the wooden creaks and murmuring waves that would soon become familiar companions. One of them knelt beside a crate, unwrapping a small, carefully kept item from a cloth bundle. It was a journal, its cover worn smooth from years of being held. They opened it slowly, tracing the faint ink of older entries. Perhaps they wrote about their fears. Perhaps they wrote about the hopes pulling them forward. Whatever the words were, they stayed close, shielded by the person who needed them. Another traveler tested the hammock assigned to them, easing their weight into the gentle sway. They smiled faintly, comforted, perhaps, by the soft rocking motion that mirrored the calm rise and fall of tide against the hull. A young deckhand passed by with a bucket of water, greeting them with a polite nod. His face held the easy familiarity of someone who had grown up around ships, someone who found tranquility not in stillness, but in the rhythm of the sea. As preparations continued, an interesting question hung subtly in the air. Would everything go as planned, or would the sea, with its unpredictable nature and hidden depths, bring something unexpected? The story does not push for answers yet. The whisper of mystery remains just a faint outline in the mist, a gentle reminder that every journey carries both certainty and uncertainty, woven together like the fibers of a coiled rope. When all seemed ready, the captain stepped up to the deck, his voice calm as he addressed the crew. Even though his words were simple instructions, something in his tone felt almost ceremonial. The beginning of a voyage, no matter how routine, always carried a quiet significance. A small moment where life paused. Before shifting into motion, ropes were loosened. Sails remained tied for now, resting like folded wings. The ship swayed slightly as the tide nudged its hull, as if encouraging it forward. Below deck, the travelers shared soft conversations. They spoke of where they came from, of the roads that led them to this harbor, and of what little they hoped to find beyond the sea. None of them spoke too loudly. Their voices blended gently with the soft hum of the ship, creating a warm undercurrent of human presence. A kettle warmed on a small stove, filling the cabin with a mild scent of herbs. Its warmth soothed the cool morning air, offering comfort to hands still chilled from the walk through town. One traveler leaned against a wooden beam, the soft thud of waves reverberating through the planks behind them. They closed their eyes, letting the sensation settle in their chest, a feeling like something old and familiar. Even though they had never sailed like this before, these little moments were the heart of the chapter, not grand events, not dramatic turns, just the soft unfolding of a journey's beginning. Yet, as gentle as everything seemed, there was a subtle awareness that something waited beyond the horizon. Some truth, some discovery, some change that none of them could yet imagine. It hovered quietly, like the faint shimmer of light just before sunrise, there, but not quite visible. The air grew slightly warmer as the first thin streaks of dawn stretched across the sky, illuminating the masts and casting long, delicate reflections over the water. A gull glided overhead, its wings catching the early light, and its distant call fading softly into the vastness of the morning. And in the stillness just before the ship's ropes were finally drawn in, there was a moment, a quiet, lingering moment, where time seemed to slow its breath. The morning had fully settled over the harbor by the time the last preparations were quietly completed. Soft sunlight pooled across the deck in warm, gentle strokes, catching on coils of rope and glimmering along the edges of wooden railings. The sea, once a cool stretch of bluish gray, now shimmered with faint golden ripples, as though the dawn itself were slowly waking beneath its surface. In this final chapter of our tale, the focus draws closer to a single, peaceful moment, the moment when all movement slows, and a journey finds its breath before beginning in earnest. It is a chapter about the quiet stillness before departure, and the subtle ways people steady themselves when stepping away from the familiar. Yet woven through this calm is a soft, lingering mystery, something not yet revealed, but gently present in the background, waiting to unfold when the time is right. The ship rested at the dock with a kind of serene confidence, its masts rising proudly against the sky. The air held a mild warmth now, carrying the faint smell of dried nets, ocean salt, and the wooden musk of the ship's hull. The breeze had softened, brushing gently across the deck like a slow exhale. The travelers, who had spent the early hours settling into their cabins and learning the quiet language of the ship, gradually made their way above deck again. Not in a hurry, but drawn upward, as if the new day itself had called them to witness it. They emerged to a world washed in morning light. Some shaded their eyes with their hands, taking in the wide stretch of sea. Others leaned over the railing, watching the thin froth of the tide drift lazily along the dock posts. And a few simply stood still, absorbing the soft warmth of the sun as if letting the moment imprint itself on their memory. A calm hum of activity continued around them. A pair of crewmen tightened the remaining knots on the barrels. Another carefully checked the rigging, fingers moving with practiced precision. Even these simple motions seemed almost like gestures in a slow, thoughtful dance, each step measured, each movement gentle, as though respecting the quiet atmosphere of the morning. The captain walked the deck with the steady rhythm of someone accustomed to the sea's subtle signals. His eyes traced the horizon, the sky, the faint shift of wind. He spoke softly with the first mate, their voices calm and even. Whatever they discussed, it did not disturb the tranquility. Instead, it blended with it, becoming another layer of the peaceful morning sounds. Nearby, a traveler sat on a small wooden crate, holding a folded map in their hands. They smoothed it out slowly, tracing the faint lines that charted the sea. Their fingers followed the drawn coastline, the quiet curves of islands, the speculative dotted paths that represented routes yet to be taken. The map felt cool and familiar beneath their fingertips, grounding them as the reality of the journey settled into their awareness. Another traveler leaned against the mast, their eyes half closed, listening to the faint wooden creaking as the ship gently shifted. The sound was soothing, steady, rhythmic, and within it, they found a sense of peace. Each creak felt like a reminder that they were standing at the beginning of something new. Something open, something filled with possibility. Down by the railing, the older traveler who had lingered to watch the town earlier now looked toward the shore one last time. The harbor buildings glowed softly under the sun, their stone facades warm and familiar. A few people walked along the main path, moving about their morning routines. The sight brought a bittersweet comfort, a reminder of home, but also a gentle acknowledgement that life would continue there. Even as the travelers moved forward, they closed their eyes briefly, perhaps whispering a quiet farewell in their thoughts. When they opened them again, there was a calm acceptance in their expression, as if they had made their peace with whatever lay ahead. The breeze shifted slightly, brushing across the deck with a cool softness. A few loose strands of rope lifted and settled again. The sails rustled in the faint wind, though they remained tied, waiting for the moment they would unfurl. And then, in the midst of this gentle stillness, a small, subtle mystery surfaced. One of the sailors paused near the bow, looking toward the horizon with a puzzled expression. Nothing alarming. Nothing dramatic. Just a faint flicker of something that caught the corner of his eye. A glimmer. A distant shape. A trick of light where the sky met the sea. He squinted slightly, trying to make sense of it. But after a moment, he shook his head softly, as if deciding it must have been nothing more than the morning sun playing gently with the waves. Still, the moment lingered. It settled lightly in the air like an unanswered question, quiet, faint, but somehow present, a whisper of the unknown, a hint that the sea held stories of its own. Stories that would reveal themselves in time. The ship's bell sounded with a soft, measured ring, clear and gentle, echoing through the crisp morning air. It was not a signal of urgency, but rather an invitation. A guiding note that brought everyone's attention back to the present moment. The captain stepped forward, his voice warm and steady as he addressed the travelers. He spoke of the day ahead, of the calm conditions, of the first stretch of the voyage that would ease them into the rhythm of life at sea. He reassured them that the beginning would be simple, gentle, and carefully managed. His words, though practical, carried a soothing quality, like an anchor to settle any restless thoughts before the ship slipped away from land. The crew moved into position, slow and coordinated. The ropes closest to the shore loosened slightly. The wooden planks of the gangway shifted with a soft thud as they were lifted. The sails, though still furled, stirred faintly in the changing wind, hinting at the journey soon to come. One by one, the travelers felt a small change in the air, a kind of quiet readiness. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. Just a gradual settling of spirit, like the calm intake of breath before stepping forward. The older travelers straightened their posture, the map holder folded their paper carefully, tucking it away. The one leaning against the mast lifted their gaze to the open sky, and at that precise moment, the sunlight brightened slightly, casting a gentle glow across the deck that softened every shadow and warmed every wooden surface. It felt like a delicate blessing from the morning, a reminder that beginnings can be quiet and still, yet filled with meaning. The ship shifted again, just barely, its hull responding to the subtle pull of the tide. The water lapped softly against its sides, creating a soothing rhythm that rose and fell with the slow beat of the sea. There was no grand announcement. No dramatic call. Just the calm sense that the moment was drawing near. The captain raised his hand slightly, a few of the crew nodded in understanding, and though the ship had not yet moved from the dock, it felt as though it stood right on the threshold, the edge of stillness before motion. This is where our chapter draws to a close. In a moment suspended between the comfort of the known and the quiet pull of the unknown, the sea stretches ahead, shimmering softly, carrying within it a promise of discoveries that lie just beyond the horizon. If you're still awake, gently let your breathing slow, feel your body sink a little deeper into comfort. As the quiet of the night settles softly around you, let the gentle echoes of this story fade into a warm, peaceful calm. You've traveled far tonight, through history, through imagination, through quiet moments shaped by time. Now, allow yourself to drift slowly, easily, into a deep and restful sleep. Good night. And may the quiet stories of the past carry you gently into your dreams.